passion guide individuals and family businesses to various values that match an individual philanthropic ideas. He is influent in both English and Arabic. And we have the next speaker, Marianne Sagbini, is the Managing Director at Legacy Line Family Office. She has an MBA in Governance of Family Businesses and a degree in Finance from the University of Montesquieu, that is in France. She has been working in the Middle East since 2010 with a number of multinational and home family businesses, owners of the companies operating in diverse sector in the region. He has established the most appropriate and practical structure for the governance, helping them uphold and honor their family values and sustain their wealth across generations. And she speaks Arabic, English, and French. And many of you knows always the challenge of family business. And today I think both the speakers will highlight on the continuity of these businesses, share what takes it to succeed, and what are the challenges, and what we have seen in some of the case studies where we have seen it not succeed and they going further for generations. So after the presentations, as I said, we'll handle the question and answer. So a reminder, just put your questions on the chat window. And I will leave the presentation now for Karim to start. The floor is yours.
Well, thank you, Adel. And I would like to thank the corporate group. I would like to thank everybody, welcome everybody. Good afternoon, good morning, evening, wherever you are. So the challenges of the continuity in the family business, it's a big topic. And the reason for that, we are right now living in a historic moment worldwide and here in the Middle East. Why is that? For the next 10 years, $15 trillion will be transferred from one generation to another worldwide. Here in the Middle East, we have around $1 trillion which will be passed from one generation to another. And to put things in perspective, that's equal to 60% of the GDP of the GCC, the Gulf Cooperation Council. And it accounts for 80% of the workforce. So imagine that out of every 10 employees you see around you in the workforce in the GCC, 8 are employed by family businesses. But it's not only that. Currently, we are going, half of the family businesses in the Middle East is going from the second generation to the third generation. And that's the big challenge we are facing in the GCC and the Middle East, and particularly in the GCC. Why is that? Well, 88% of family businesses fail to make it to reach the third generation. Currently, we have 60% who are in their second generation, and only 12% of these will make it to the third generation, and that's less than 3% will make it to the fourth generation. So we have $1 trillion being passed from one generation to another, which employs 8 out of every 10 employees, but only have one out of every 10 companies will make it to the third generation. And that's really the big challenge. And that's where, Marianne, if you can shed some light, what are the attributes of each generation?
Yes, sure. So for us to make sense of these numbers, we need to understand the different stages of ownership in family businesses. Basically, it starts with generation 1, which is the controlling or founding stage, or the controlling owner stage. And this is where either the father, the mother, or together actually, they own 100% of the shares. So here there is an entrepreneurial mindset, and they start hiring family members who join. The proprietorship to family business transition is in the hands of the founder. So here the founders or the owner, he would discuss with advisors about things like shared transition to the next generation or estate planning. G2, it's the sibling partnership basically, and that's actually the most difficult stage of partnership because research shows that 50% of sibling partners actually break up. So they might have started to agree on working together because they've worked together before, but it's new to them to become owners together. And for it to happen, so they need to unite under a common and shared vision and to have the continuity rationale. Do we want or don't we want to continue together? Basically here, the group of siblings, shareholders in the family will get together and make decisions about, for example, how they're going to use the profits from the business. At the third generation and the third stage is the cousin consortium. So here we have a group of cousins who are actually in partnership, and they might not be living in the same country. They might have, we have different parents. We live maybe in different countries. We've been raised under different values and cultures. So here they hold multiple roles, and we have to find also a common vision for them and a sense of purpose. And it's important to be able to build a consensus, but it's much more difficult to do it here, and it will require the capacity in the leader to do so. So for this to happen, we need to have a robust governance system. And to simplify it, what do we mean by governance? We mean talking about communication and decision making. So from G1 to G3, it's basically increasing complexity over time. And we need to understand the family dynamics that come along. This is the three-circle model by Tigeri and Davis, and which is a framework that has proven to be useful in increasing our understanding of family businesses. So the diagram represents three interdependent but overlapping systems in a family business. We have the family, the ownership, and the business or the management. And the stakeholders here, they would start, so basically the overlapping dimensions here depict 7 groups, which we will see, which represent the stakeholders. And those stakeholders start asking themselves, where do I fit? So am I an owner? Am I a family member? Am I an owner? Or am I an employee? Or am I, for example, a family member who is an owner but who do not work in the business? Am I, number 5, a non-family owner who work in the business? Or am I, number 6, a family member who work in the business but are not owners? And number 7, which is a family member who is a family member, an owner, and is working in the business. And number 7 is where usually it all starts with the founder. So the founder is the family member, the owner, and the manager at the same time. So consequently, any member of the family business will be in one of those 7 groups. And when family ownership and management overlap, so do business decisions and personal ambitions. And the greatest challenge faced by family businesses is to find this balance between all the needs, the requirements, the objectives and priorities of these members, of each member, knowing that they might sometimes conflict with each other. So how is that? For example, if we have a member who belongs to the 4th segment or the 4th group, then he is a family member, owner, and who does not work in the business. So he may request to increase the dividends distribution to enhance his investment yield, which may lead to an objection from the member of the 6th group, since he is a family member working in the business, but he is not an owner. So his wish is to retain the generated dividends to invest or reinvest them in the business. So these are family members who may be siblings, and this may dismantle, in so many cases, the family ties. Another example, I would say, would be the salary increases. So this salary increase may be welcomed by any member of the 3rd, the 5th, the 6th, or the 7th group, But these increases, they will only result in a decline in profits for the members of the second or the fourth group.
Yeah, and that's not only a financial issue, but also it's, for example, time. You will see number 7 conflicting with number 1. The entrepreneur or the owner, the family owner employee in the business is torn down between the business, giving more time for business, versus the family is always asking for more time as well.
Exactly. So basically, for a family business to function effectively over time, so each system must understand how to interact with and support the other systems. And people within each system should appreciate which decisions are theirs to make. So this interaction, support, and decision making is governance, and each of those three circles have their own forum of governance. So we have basically the simplest form, let's discuss the family. The simplest form of governance in the family system is called the family meeting. So here family members will gather to discuss things related to the family. It might be a family council, family assembly. The family assembly would be more for the cousin consortium stage when there are G3 and cousins working together. But the main aspect here is for family members to discuss family issues. The forum that exists for governance within the ownership system is called shareholders assembly. So here the owners will gather through these shareholders assembly meetings to take decisions and vote on owners' decisions, like the strategy of the company. We have different things that the owners, and we need to separate between the ownership and the management. That's the most important part. So on the business side, the governance in the business system, that's where you have your board of directors and you have your management or your executive team. So it's important to have here regular board meetings to ensure that the vision of the owners is well implemented and is being implemented. It's important to have those regulatory bodies to balance those systems together. And after placing individuals in the right seat for them to succeed, we must hold them accountable for both the execution of the strategy and the corresponding results. Succession challenges are in some ways greater here in the Middle East than in other regions because large families are more common here and inheritance laws don't really necessarily ensure the smooth transitions. So Karim, if you can shed some light on the threats of future ownership.
So based on our interaction and work over a decade with families in the Middle East, there is some attributes to the families in the Middle East which we don't find in other places like North America or Europe, where most of this academia came from and most of those systems came from. The first one is enforced heirship. Here in the Middle East, we have enforced heirship, which is the Islamic Sharia law, and this by itself might contradict with the wishes of the family should they decide to have other kind of distribution. And this usually leads to the ownership fragmentation. And ownership fragmentation, it will affect the decision making of the families. And basically, the way I put it for families, while the inheritance laws here or the enforced heirship, it's like moving hardware and softwares. We move the hardware, but the software doesn't have to be moved at the same or transferred at the same time. So yes, the ownership will be transferred, but how about the common vision? Do we want to stay together? Do we have the same values? Do we have the same vision for the future? And usually that's not shared at the same time of the transfer. And that's one of the threats we have when we have the ownership transfer. And finally, one of the attributes we see in the Middle East, unlike other jurisdictions, typically families in the Middle East happen to have assets all over the world, mostly Europe, North America, and across the Arab world. And this might create a conflict of a cross-border conflict and will have tax implication. Especially that here in the Middle East, we do not have the tax culture. We do not have the structures which you see in Europe and North America, which help out in terms of when this transfer happens. And if we look at the structure, your classical structure, which we see in the Middle East, which we see globally, we see on top usually the ultimate structure, which is the foundation or a trust. Under that, there is a holding company, and usually under that, we have a business holding and a private holding. That's a very simple, plain vanilla structure. The issue with that, most of the ownership we have here in the Middle East, it's in personal name, because owners are not incentivized to have it any other way like in Europe for tax reasons, obviously, and because we don't have income tax. And that's why they don't enjoy the benefits of what we call the optimum structures. So what are the benefits usually of having an optimum structure? It avoids unnecessary family disputes and unjustified claims. It serves as an asset protector against infringement of ownership and destruction of wealth. It protects the weaker member of the family, especially when we are going from the second to the third generation. You might have the cousin consortium, and somebody is 40 years old and the other one is 40. Having a structure will help out in the issue of optimization. And a good example I'll use here would be the changes of laws in 2017 in the UK. A lot of Middle Eastern families do have assets in the UK. Yet, because they don't have the tax culture, there was no tax planning done. And when the tax laws changed in the UK, but foreigners were taxed the same way that the British nationals were taxed at 40% in case of that. A lot of Middle Eastern families were not, until now, they're not prepared for that. And the most important point of having a structure is having the consolidation. Again, what we see common in the Middle East is the families end up having multiple entities around the world, mostly in the Arab world, and these are not consolidated or synchronized. And therefore, they won't be able to have a synchronized and aligned decision-making process. And they don't have to be cross-border. Even in the same country, you end up having multiple companies, and they are not synchronized in terms of the decision-making and consolidated. And finally, it's respecting the wishes of the senior generation. If there was wishes, they want to pass on to the next generation.
Yeah.
Usually, having this kind of structure help as an entry point for the next generation to train and for taking over the torch from the previous generation. And that takes us to the difference between the family and the business system.
Yeah. So why family businesses may not succeed to the next generation, we're going to see here in the next slides the issues and the significant issues faced by family businesses. And we need to understand first that those two systems, the family system and the business systems, are different and they differ. The family system is more of an emotional system. So here we have unconditional love of the parents. You have the roles which are based on relationships, and the relationships here are permanent. Even if there are some arguments between each other as a family, the relationships are always going to be there. The goal is to maintain harmony between them, and the power here is based on generational status in family. So who is the eldest? Is it the male eldest who will take over or not? We see some of these in the Middle East, but this thinking has been shifted lately to having maybe more competent people on as a next leader rather than having just the eldest. The business system is more of a task-based system. So here there is a conditional approval and the roles are based more on functions. The goal here is to maintain productivity rather than maintaining harmony. And the relationships are more temporary and contractual. So you come in, you might stay there, you might leave. You will not stay forever. And the power is based on performance and title, on authority and influence, and not on the generational status. So basically, in the family system, fairness as well means the same and equal. But in the business system, fairness is based on performance and on equity.
And that's very common in the Middle East. Again, to shed some light on the cultural issue. By default, here culturally, the eldest will end up being the next leader. But it doesn't mean that the eldest, and we see it all the time, it doesn't mean the eldest first is passionate about taking that role as the next leader, or competent, and worse, neither competent or passionate. Yet, for cultural reasons, they end up being put in that position. And that's usually a recipe for disaster in family businesses.
So what are the significant issues that face family businesses? We have continuity planning or lack of continuity planning. So basically, it's kind of a lack of sense of shared purpose. The term continuity planning here implies keeping things together rather than just getting a succession plan done. So continuity is actually more than planning. We want continuity of the family, we want continuity of the enterprise, of the legacy, and most importantly, the family vision and values. So do we want to continue together? Do we have clarity about our future strategy and our future vision? Are we aligned on the vision and values that we have? Those are important questions. If not answered, might lead to conflicts in the future. Owner or manager, basically. So the founder is usually owner and manager. Then you transition to the next generation, and family members need to understand where they stand. So are they taking decisions as owners or as managers? And this is the confusion, and we need to separate between both ownership and management and have a clarity of roles, which is essential. Another issue is succession planning and generational change. So do we have clarity on who are the next owners, who can or cannot become a shareholder? Do we have clarity on who is the next leader? Are we mentoring and training the next generation? How are active family members' performance evaluated? So do we have remuneration as well set for them? Is there a fair exit mechanism in place? What if one of the family members want to leave the business and exit? What would happen there? If there's no exit mechanism in place, that would lead to conflicts as well. Another issue that is facing family businesses is management conflict or lack of it. So conflicts are very common in family businesses due to these differences we've talked about between the family system and the business system. But I would say that conflict is good. Our society really portrays conflict as a negative thing. And I would say that with most examples given in today's society, conflict is and can be a pretty negative thing. But however, when done correctly in a safe space and with boundaries and with rules, it can create solutions that haven't risen to the top. So before, it would give you an opportunity to discuss things and that were not discussed previously. We need to be comfortable to engage in difficult conversations. So a conflict resolution mechanism should be clearly defined, and that would help family members deal with this. Finally, the lack of structure. So Karim was discussing the structure before, and having a proper structure is essential. Without it, this will create conflicts between family members and disputes on who is an owner, where are we, who owns what, and who are the next owners.
That's what I mean. Again, because of the lack of this tax culture you have in Europe and North America and other places. Typically, what we have is a family member. So somebody here in the Gulf will go to North Africa and set up a business, which might supersede the current structure we have here. Yet, When it comes to the ownership, it's usually for practical reasons, it ends up being in the name of the person who set up the business there, without really putting a consolidation across the board and across different jurisdictions. With time, what happens that the person who set up the business, using that example in North Africa, will feel entitled that this is his company and that's his work, and it's not part of the whole family group. Why? Because, mind you, the capital came and the idea came initially from the family business. So again, that kind of a lack of clarity in the structure will lead eventually to a drift or a conflict.
So what are the threats of succession planning, what we've seen as well, and the triggers that might lead to conflicts? Even if a family is in a state of equilibrium, there are certain triggers that might lead to conflict, and according to family members, those threats are conflicting values. So basically having conflicting values. Sometimes
Go ahead.
next generation
To be
business.
clear, the
Yeah,
values, you don't mean by values like ethics.
we cannot hear you, Karim. I'm sorry, I'm not sure.
I know there is some background noise from one of the participants. So what we mean by conflicting values, we don't mean ethics. What mean conflicting values, some family members are willing to sacrifice the bottom line to maintain the name of the family business, and others want to see growth and to preserve only the company or the companies that are profitable, regardless of if they want to preserve the name or not. And these are the kind of conflicting values we don't see in the first generation, who obviously are taking all the decisions. The second generation, then we start seeing that conflicting values, and without aligning them, that will lead to a conflict.
Yeah. And having next generation joining the business, so some family are open to have the next generation joining their business, but if it's not well structured and if they do, it is not clear of where they're joining, in which department, what role they will be taking, what are their responsibilities, there might be a clash between them. We also have in-laws joining the business, which might be a trigger of conflicts, and we see that in the region and worldwide. So usually families try to separate between the family members working in the business and the spouses who are basically the bigger and the larger family circuit. Karim, you want to?
Yeah, and a good example on this, usually typically we sit with families and they say no in-laws. We don't want the in-laws in the family business. We don't want them to be managers or working in the family business, and definitely we don't want them to be owners in the family business. But yet, because of the enforced heirship issue which we discussed earlier, there's a good chance, and usually people think in a linear way, that the grandfather will pass away, then the father, then so on and so forth. But in occasions, as we know in life, sometimes the younger generation end up passing, a member of the younger generation end up passing before their parents. And by default, the spouse will end up inheriting, because of the enforced heirship, end up inheriting ownership in these family businesses, which contradict what they agreed on. So these are usually, again, the conflicts which is peculiar to this region.
Definitely, there are other triggers which are related to management incompetence. So lack of leadership, management incompetence, not being ready to take over. So sometimes something happens, and I'm going to link it to the also poor health or death of a family member, because we've seen it lately, and in light of everything that is happening recently. A death of a family member without having proper governance systems in place will definitely lead to some friction between family members. It's not clear to them what maybe was the wishes of the father or the founder. So then if there's uncertainty, those will create issues.
And it's not unique only to the Middle East, Munir. I mean, we see it also in the Far East and in other places, less in Europe and North America. But whenever we want to hire anybody in the business, usually they go through a due process, sending their CV, first, second, third interview, and so on and so forth. But when the family business is hiring somebody from the family, they bypass all of this, and they end up being in a position, and some because of the family status, they end up being in a managerial position. Some of them, which they're not fit for. And because of the culture we have here in the Middle East, because we don't confront and we have this respect and so on and so forth, especially between generations, that's why people are silent on it. They don't discuss it. But this leads to basically you're putting an incompetent driver to drive that family business. And usually this have negative consequences.
So those are some of the threats that we've been discussing. Definitely, there are others like sale of a business or political insecurity or instability that also other family members take into consideration while putting their succession plan and their governance system in place. So how can family businesses sustain their legacies? That's the question. And it's through basically governance and legacy planning. So we used to hear that maybe yes, it's important to do it, but it's not urgent. Now this has shifted to we've heard a lot of families saying that yes, it is urgent. In light of everything that is happening around us, having a proper plan, a succession plan is important. First, we start by committing to fairness with each other. As family members, we want to discuss this together and we want to make sure that there's transparency and fairness to everybody. So we go through a process of succession planning by developing the charter or the constitution. We set the rules and the effective rules basically on how to take decisions together as a family. How are we going to communicate? We need to prepare the structure, as Karim was discussing, so the estate planning and making sure that the family business is well structured. It's put in a proper structure, and we need to separate between the ownership and the management. We need also basically to execute what we've written and what we've agreed. It's not only drafting the charter and putting the rules together, but it's really going ahead and implementing those and making sure everybody is accountable to their roles and responsibilities.
And honestly, with over a decade of meeting and talking with families and professionals around the world and in the region, there is a fine. You need to combine the emotions and the structure. So yes, we do have to have the right structure and the right, nice legal structure and so on and so forth, and the body is related to that. But we cannot underestimate also the emotions, and we have to balance these two acts, as Marianne mentioned before, which is very important. Because I've seen people who believe that a structure will solve all and I was one of them actually when I started this career. I thought that one structure will solve all the issues. With time, you learn that if you have any emotions, jealousy, competitiveness between siblings, and so on and so forth, it can undermine any structure and any family. And that will lead to the destruction of the family business, and they will become part of that 88% will not make it to the third generation.
So that's why we need to really understand the benefits of developing this structure and this constitution. So it will help families understand how the business will be run, so the governance of it, how the family will decide what to do next. So what is the decision-making process and how are we going to vote on things and take decisions? How to be sure everyone in the family understands what is happening and why. So communication is key and is very important so that nobody is felt regular communication to ensure that people do not feel left out. What to do when family members cannot agree? So if we have a conflict mechanism in place, conflict resolution mechanism in place, family members will feel more comfortable discussing issues that were not discussed previously, just for the sake of, I don't want to have, I don't want my father to be mad at me, or I don't want to create this tension between us, so I'm going to avoid discussing those topics. How to ensure the survival of the business by finding new leaders. So a succession needs to happen, succession plan to ensure that the competent person will take over. And if we do not have a family member who is competent, to maybe find a professional to do so. And now we've seen that with families. It's not only about having family members take over. If there is no competent person, then they are looking into other options. Teamwork, and this developing the structure and this family charter will make sure and possible that family members continue to work together. So basically, those are the benefits of developing a proper structure and the family charter, and definitely separating between family business and private wealth, because there's a mix. We've always seen that family members who are working in the business, they tend to not separate between the family business wealth and their private wealth. Sometimes they use the resources of the business for their own personal things, and this might create conflicts because other family members and passive family members would not accept that. If they are owners as well, they would feel that there is no proper separation and it's not clear who is taking what from the business.
And this is very relevant to what we're going through these days through COVID-19. We've seen it post 2008, where the private wealth was used when the business were, losing momentum and they were in the negative. Private wealth was used to basically offset the deficits we're having in the family business. And another example, which is very common in practice in the Middle East, is personal guarantees. How many times we've seen, the personal guarantees would be the personal using the private wealth to guarantee facilities for the family business. Now, things will be okay when things are okay, but when things go wrong, not only they will lose the business, but also lose the private wealth or the private assets. And that's without maybe communicating, and that's define what's communicating. We hear always this. A lot of families they complain, or a lot of family members who are in the business, they complain about sending over the financial statements to their passive family members, and they complain that they never replied to it and they never commented on it. And then you talk to the passive family member, they say we don't know what's happening in the family business. So again, the word communication has to be defined for both, and accordingly practiced during those governance exercises.
Yeah. So basically, those are the benefits of developing the structure. And finally, good governance is the product of having effective rules, agreements, and policies and plans to allow the best form of transition and succession to take place. And it's never too early to start planning the succession. I will thank you, and I think we'll leave it now for the Q&A if anybody has any questions.
Thank you, everyone.
Thank you. Yeah, thank you, Karim, and thank you, Marianne, for the insights on the presentation and sharing the words of the challenges, on the success, on the emotions, and many things that comes with the generation and succession planning under the family business. But we have a few questions, and I have got also two questions. I received it before we start the presentation, so I will start that one first. One is on the board of governance, okay, for those family businesses. What is your opinion or recommendation, suggestions? It's always better to have non-executive members outside the family, so people externally, and is there any ratio to do that?
Yeah, well, definitely depends who you're talking to. If you're talking to the first generation, the founders generation, usually they're entrepreneurial, and they feel a board will restrict them, especially if they have some of the strangers, non family members or sitting on the board. But in due course, having a non-family member on the board definitely will professionalize the meetings. Now, it's case by case whether they have executive powers or not. But having first a board in place and having a non-family member on that board who is coming, he or she coming with their own know-how, and they can add to the family business, always is a big positive point.
And just add to that, Kareem, so discussing about the ratio, the question was the ratio. Usually, family members tend to have more family members on the board than non-family members, because definitely they do not want to be outvoted at the board meetings. So even if we suggest having 4 family members, we suggest having 3 non-family members, whether they are executives, but also it's good to have independent members who are definitely outside the business to bring their know-how, as Kareem was saying.
Okay, thank you for that one. So we've got a question from Joseph, if I understood it well. So the family constitution documents. So some of the family businesses, they have those documents in place, but how often those will succeed over long term, and what steps should families take over the years to ensure continued relevance and acceptance?
I'll start with that. Basically, yes, this is what we've seen. Families who've done the constitution, they've done the first step. But they think that if doing the constitution is done, then it's fine. We're good to go. But it's not the case. We really need to make sure it's being implemented. So this family business constitution might be relevant today to the family, but it needs to be revised as well in a couple of years, especially if another generation comes in. There are certain points in it that would be changed accordingly. The family business constitution itself is a good document, but again, it needs to be implemented. We need to make sure that everything that was agreed by all shareholders is happening. So the committees are being created, the board of directors are meeting, the shareholders are meeting. This really needs to happen. Otherwise, there's nothing to be done. If they're just going to write the charter and put it on the shelf, then no action would be taken and no improvement would be done for the business.
Need to be practiced.
Yeah.
And you mentioned that emotions can undermine set of governance. Okay, how you can assure that active family members will accept set of governance?
First of all, they need to speak. I mean, if you give them the forum, and we noticed this at the very early stage of the governance, by giving them the forum, because before doing the family constitution, we have private meetings usually. And you'll be amazed how much they have ideas and complaints, or positive or negative, I mean, comments, feedback. Giving people the opportunity to speak their mind by itself is the first step to offset any ill feelings they might be harboring towards their family members or siblings. And it's ongoing. I mean, if from a practical point of view, once we have the conflict resolution committee, if they have any conflict or have any complaint, they can always raise it to that committee and be dealt with. But that will be in an investment.
So that committee would be what, from the same family, or it will be non-member families?
The conflict committee, basically we call it as well the settlement committee. This committee is not only made of family members, so there should be a senior family member part of it, someone who is respected by everyone, but there should be also wise people, another 1 or 2 persons on this committee, like let's say three members But these wise people are also respected by the family. So it's someone that family members look up to, that they feel comfortable going to when there is an issue, and who are fair minded, who are wise, who can give, who don't have any conflict of interest with the business. That's important. So they would elect those members and agree on who are those members so that everyone is comfortable going to them.
Thanks for the insight. We've got a question from Christina. What do you think would be the best way to structure the business to avoid generation on generation conflict? What would be the basics that need to be covered to ensure a smooth transition?
You mean the process? Well, we have a process which take care of, as we said, the structural part, knowing where the company, the corporate documents, and based on that, we need to look at what is the ultimate structure to have. In this case, mostly in the Middle East, what we see again, we're dealing with multiple jurisdictions, and in certain places outside the GCC, we need to also look at the tax implication side. In parallel, from the governance point of view, we have the private meetings, which usually leads to drafting the charter. And the charter is drafted by the working group, which is from the family member. It will be a smaller group, not the whole family. We can bring the whole family, usually 3 to 5 people. And once that's in place, we reflect what we agreed on in the family charter on the level of the holding company, and then start the implementation.
Maybe we can shed some light, Karim, just on the structure. So if it makes sense, because you discussed it earlier, but what not having maybe shares owned in individual names, and why it's better to put it in a structure. What would it offset to have the structure and not having the shares owned by family members' names personally?
Yeah, I mean, again,
Number of shareholders.
if we're talking here in the Middle East, again, there's something actually we didn't shed light on. Here in the Middle East, we have a newcomer to the game, foundations. Mostly in UAE, we have 3 jurisdictions, the IFC, the Abu Dhabi Global Market, and the RAC foundations. So the ownership can be placed into these foundations, and then working on the bylaws of these foundations will dictate the wishes and how should people act, how the family will be able to manage as beneficial owner, not as legal owners, the assets under the foundation. And this will avoid many problems. One of the problems we highlighted would be the possibility of the son or the daughter passing before their parents, and therefore their spouses, who were supposed, according to the governance system, the in-laws are not supposed to join or become owners. So that's one way to protect them. Another, because it's very common in the Middle East, we see them, some of them are dual citizens or maybe residing in Europe. If this happened while they're, or in North America, being green card holder, if this happens during the event happened, the death happened during that period, those beneficial owners, if the ownership is in their name, it will have a huge tax implication as well.
Yeah.
Marianne, you have anything?
No, I'm good.
We have got another comment or question from Christina. We're talking about succession planning. Do you think the strategy of the business should take this into account so that the people on that succession plan are trained accordingly? I mean, I could say that, in every business, you have to take into consideration succession planning part of your strategy. I mean, definitely will apply similarly on the family business, and on the succession planning, you'll put the time frame required, you'll put maybe the tools required to accomplish that target and so forth. Any views from your end?
Yeah, honestly, like anything else in life, it's having the mind and the intention. In Arabic, we call it the niyyah. Uh, And while what we're talking about is very good and handy, when it comes to reality, a lot of those families are not engaging in having or reorganizing their family business according to best practices. And they attend many seminars like the one we're doing and webinars and so on. But then you meet them 3, 4 years later and you find they have done nothing. And the reason I always I always equate it to somebody losing weight. I mean, it's a mindset issue. You need to have the mindset and say, okay, I want to be healthy first. And then you know, whether you go to the gym or you have diet food, that's something else. And these are the solutions which we've been talking about for the last 45 minutes. But there should be the intention and the mindset. And for some reason or another, many of those families are not taking the first step of saying, we want help, we want to do this is the time. And if we don't do it, we will be part of the 88%. Statistics are there. And every family knows stories about how, you know, by the next generation or the third generation, everything was lost. And once that is taking, once they take this first step, the first question is, do we want to stay together? Do we share the same values? Where do we want to be in 5, 10 years? And that goes to the strategy. First, as a family, where do we want to be? And then once we have that in common value and vision, and we are clear we want to go from point A to point B, and why we want to go from point A to point B, then we can work on the business strategies. Because usually, again, family businesses in the Middle East don't have only one business. They have multiple businesses. But first, let them figure out if they want to be together, whether being the first to the second generation, or definitely second to the third generation. And the third strategy will work out itself eventually.
Yeah, I just want to add that, Karim, sometimes the family or the founder even they think that they know what other family members think and what are their wishes, but sometimes we sit with the father and then he will tell you, I would like to give the business to my son, and if you sit with the son will tell you, if I take the business I might sell it. So there's sometimes lack of communication. They think they know, but if communication is not there, if they do not talk about it and they keep it to their imagination, this will lead to conflict.
And I like to simplify things for families, again, in terms of planning. And the key point here is lack of planning. When a family wants to take a vacation, a summer vacation, could you imagine? And that's a fun event, right? It's maybe a week going on a summer vacation. How much communication they go back and forth deciding on the destination, when they're gonna go, how to be fair, because not everybody can go in that particular week, say in July. And how can we be fair and compensate that family member next time? Next time we'll accommodate them because this time they were unable to join. And that's a simple event. If they cannot make consensus on that simple event, how can they make, if they don't have the planning tools and they haven't sat together and decided on a fair process of making decisions, then how can they decide on the future of the business and how to grow the business and how much they want how much dividends they want to take out of the business and so on and so forth? It will be impossible.
Yeah, this is a nice example, Karim. But today, after Corona's change, there is no summer holidays.
Zoom.
Yeah, only Zoom. We're running out of the time, but we have 2 more questions for people who wants to stay onwards. We can maybe answer it. It's good interactions we've got here. So one is from Barbara. What is your experience in involving executive members from outside the family? So business proven experts. In Europe, there were similar issues we discussed now, though business success was often set above the family benefits often family members stay owners of the company, but not necessarily running the business day to day.
That's, again, it's not only in the Middle East, but generally there is a confusion between when they give their opinion, who am I talking to? In my capacity as an owner, as a board member, or as a CEO on the management side? And this is conflict, and that's very common in family businesses, especially when you go from the first to the second generation. Because in the first generation, the founder, he is or she is the owner, they are the strategist or the board, and at the same time, they are the management, the CEO. But with time, because of the three systems we saw in the presentation, the first question we need to ask ourselves as family members, when I'm giving my opinion or I'm contributing, am I contributing as an owner? Am I contributing as a board member if they're on the board, or am I contributing as an employee of the family of the business? And that's usually the confusion we see on family business. But I'll let Marianne, if you want to answer on the issue of which was raised.
Can you just repeat the second part, please, Adil?
Yeah. So it was talking about what is your experience involving executive members from outside the family. So because in Europe, for example, mentioned here from Barbara, that they still can be the owners, but then day to day maybe they give it to somebody else to manage it.
Yeah. So basically, it's as if they are capable and qualified, they should be working in the business. If there are positions for them, we should not be creating positions just for the sake of employing family members and having them as executive on board. So you have executives who are family members and executives who are non-family members. So it depends, it really depends on the need and the professional skills and the capabilities that are required. There's no one size fits all for that.
And depends on the size of the business again. And the good news here, we are seeing a trend of accepting non-family members being on the board and even being leaders of the business. We had a case of three brothers who didn't want to take responsibility for, one of them didn't want to take responsibility on behalf of all the family members. So in order not to show any bias, they decided to bring a non-family CEO to lead the family business. But again, it really depends on the size of the family business and the number of the headcounts. How many are we dealing with? 4 or 5 brothers, or are we talking, 19 cousins?
Yeah, bringing outside executives, like having a non-family CEO, is a good thing. Could be a good thing, and is a good thing only if you have those proper structures in place. So unless, because we've seen as well families who have a CEO who is a non-family member, but this CEO, if you sit with him, he would tell you that I can barely do anything because it's just the title and I'm just here, but the family members do not let me do my job properly. They always interfere. So if we're going to bring non-executive family members, executive non-family members, we should let them do their job and not interfere in their business for it to succeed.
And that's the message I want to send here is, even if we have non-family members managing the business, that doesn't relieve you as an owner, as a shareholder, doesn't relieve you from the responsibilities. Because some people think, if I can, let somebody else manage the business for me and I can go and retire or not be involved or pursue my passion. But still, as an owner, as a shareholder, you have responsibilities. And without setting those, being an active or contributing to the shareholder assembly and the strategy of the business, then eventually the business will not have a direction. And without a direction, eventually it will fail. or at best, no.
Sorry. I was just going to go to the last question, so before we end up the session. So what is the new family business law? There was, I think, a law in August here, the government here released it. Anything you want to enlighten on that one?
We haven't really examined it. We are looking at it right now. It was issued in August in Dubai by Sheikh Mohammed. And we're looking at the benefits and how we can implement it. It's early to discuss it.
Okay. Yeah, I think it was things related to jurisdictions and relocations and cross-border issues and things like this. But yeah, I agree. I don't have the full details and analysis on that.
But I'll give it to UAE, honestly. I'll give it to UAE how, again, not only in this line of business, how proactive they are. It's maybe the first jurisdiction which introduced trust law, foundations. Now we have this law for family business, which was launched, which was passed in August. And they understand, the leadership in this country understand the importance of family businesses. We started with the statistics. 80% of the workforce is impacted by these family businesses. Now, it's not about wealth transfer and so on and so forth. It has a huge social impact. When we see 88% won't make it to the third generation, that's huge in any economy. In Europe, the statistics are not even, I mean, maybe 25, 26% will make it. But again, the 75 won't make it. So it's a global phenomenon. But at least here they are taking a proactive approach towards that. And through the DIFC, the ADGM, and recently last March, just before the Corona, RAC launched their instrument, the foundation instrument.
All right, to this, I think we'll come to the end of today's sessions, challenges in continuity of family business. We would like to thank all of you who have attended this session. And please do keep in touch and follow us on the social media for the next events. Thank you very much, Karim and Marianne, and look forward to seeing you in other events. Thank you.
Thank you, everyone.
Thank you. Thanks.